The Chargers get shut out of the deal they wanted in Carson, but they still could be moving with the Rams to Inglewood, or not. The city dawdled on a busted storm drain in San Carlos, and 8 houses get flooded in last week's rainstorms. State revenue looks pretty rosy as Governor Brown resists pleas to lock in additional spending, preferring to feed the rainy day fund. And Mayor Faulkner does a victory lap while outlining his agenda for this election year in the State of the City address. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Dan McSwain, business columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Mark.
Good to have you back again. Ricky Young, editor of the Union Tribune Watchdog team. Hi, Ricky.
Hey, Mark.
Glad you're here today. Michael Smolens, politics editor at the Union Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Good to see you, Mark.
We got a Union Tribune theme going, except for KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hi, Andrew.
Glad to be here.
Glad you're here today. Well, Disney chief Bob Iger was hired to make the Chargers' case for building a dazzling new stadium in the LA suburb of Carson. Here's his take on how it went this week with NFL owners.
I think the presentation went well. Dean Spanos and Mark Davis and I talked about our passion for bringing the NFL back to Los Angeles, talked about the wonderful attributes of the Carson project, and spoke from our hearts. And I think our comments resonated.
Well, not so much. Owners batted down the team's Carson plan. Instead, they gave team owner Dean Spanos a one-year option to explore sharing a new stadium with the Rams or figure out a way to stay here in San Diego. Dan, lots of angles here. What's the main point? How would this work, joining the Rams up there?
Well, it depends on the deal. In the beginning, the Rams owner, Stan Kroenke, a genuine sports mogul, a billionaire many times over. He owns 6 other teams, I think. And he said, well, I'll take a second team into my stadium. We'll make it a 2-home team stadium, but only as a tenant, which means a whole lot of revenue flows to the Rams and not to the tenant. Second team.
Yeah, right.
Then, under pressure from the NFL in early December, Kroenke said, well, I'm completely open to a 50-50 partnership. As long as they put in equity and take the risk just like I do, I'll have an equal partner there. Now, as we sit here, I think the Spanos family and their team of advisors are trying to figure out which would be better. Should they sign a lease and reduce their debt and reduce their risk to go to Inglewood? Or should they borrow a whole bunch of money and become 50-50 partners with one of the toughest businessmen in the United States?
Or maybe even stay here, and we'll get to that in a minute here.
Right.
Well, it would seem, from reading your story, it would seem the Spanos would have to pony up a lot more money up front to move in with the Rams than even stay here, right? There's a relocation fee and all sorts of other things.
Oh, you bet. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell was asked about the relocation fee. The NFL said it was going to be $550 million per team a week ago. Then during the press conference, the big announcement on Tuesday, he was asked and he said no comment. But my sources tell me that that's still the number. So they would have to split a $2 billion team. So that's $1 billion, stadium.
Stadium, yeah, cost of stadium.
So just the construction cost is around $2 billion. And then the Chargers would have to come up with $550 million additional dollars. So you're talking about $1.5 billion, $1.6 billion to move to Inglewood.
Yeah, and that's a lot more than we were talking about of the Chargers share in the plan that was put forth to stay at Qualcomm or others that have been floated, right, to stay here in San Diego.
Yes, after the expectation at the Mission Valley site, which is what the mayor was pushing, was that the city would put up $200 million, the county would put up $150 million, and then they would sell, somebody would sell personal seat licenses. These are rights for season ticket holders.
Rights to buy a ticket.
The right to buy a ticket. You pay cash up front. It boggles my mind.
Gotta love the NFL. They just got so many revenue streams.
The NFL has latched onto that idea, shall we say. And so that's about, the NFL estimated that was around $200 million. And so that leaves about $450, $500 million for the Chargers to come up with.
Dan, on the Inglewood project, though, how does that compare to what the Chargers would have had to risk going into Carson? I mean, that was a very expensive proposition for them to go into debt. Is it the same or even worse or more in Inglewood?
Oh, that's a good question. It's essentially the same.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but they thought they could, or at least they said they could do it in Carson.
Sure, and they had a partnership that was already negotiated. That's an important difference. The Raiders and the Chargers had a true 50-50 deal. Now they have to go negotiate with Stan Kroenke, and who knows what the deal's going to be.
Well, wouldn't the Chargers be seen as kind of the stepchild up there? Because the Rams have a history dating to the 1940s in L.A. Big fan base, you would think. A lot of went to the games with my dad kind of stuff that the Chargers just don't have.
Well, it's a marketing effort for both teams. The polls show that the Rams have more fans today. The Raiders may or may not have more fans. So it's a marketing effort, and that would cost quite a bit of money itself. And which is why Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, was brought on board. The thinking with the Chargers and the Raiders in that partnership was that here's the guy who runs Disneyland. Here's the guy that has all your kids singing the theme from Frozen until you go crazy.
Knows how to make you love him.
This is a guy who knows how to build a brand, arguably the best in the world. But my sources tell me this morning that he's out, that his deal to buy into the team and be involved does not apply to an Inglewood project.
Wow, so it is kind of changing quickly.
Yeah.
Andrew, I wanted to turn to you. We're going to get to the State of the Union later in the show, but what's the mayor have to say about all of this?
State of the City, you mean?
State of the City, sorry. I knew I was going to say that today. State of the City.
Yeah, the mayor gave a press conference on Wednesday, the day after the decision in Houston, and he stuck by his previous positions, which is that the Mission Valley Stadium site is the most viable plan. The city already owns the property. He said he's also still open to a stadium downtown. But he said, again, as he said in the past, that there are a lot of challenges to that. The city would have to acquire that property. It would have to move a bus yard that is currently there. And he said that the fan support is aside in Mission Valley. So, he said that his phone line is still open. We just heard from the UT today that that the lines of communication are now open.
Yeah, they've talked since this whole thing.
Exactly. So, Mayor Faulkner is certainly in a better position than he was a week ago, but it's still a tough sell.
All right. It's also interesting, Mark, just on that note, what the mayor said this morning is that he and the city and the county are open to sort of a two-track situation while Spanos and the Chargers explore Inglewood, that the city is willing to talk on their front as long as it's sincere. Now, when this all came down on Tuesday, they were a little harder line, sort of suggesting, don't waste our time if this is a charade. Now they're changing tone a little bit, just saying that if they're sincere, we're fine with them exploring both options, which is kind of interesting.
One last question. We're going to move on in this segment. Still have to go to a vote, right? They're still talking. If it were in San Diego, people have to weigh in on this. And what about the timetable? Or is this going to drag out another year, or we're going to hear pretty quickly whether they're actually going to L.A. or they have a viable discussion here?
The plan B that the Chargers have been working on while they were still in uncertainty is to hold a citizens initiative, which is essentially a ballot initiative sponsored by the Chargers that would answer all the questions, environmental questions, public financing questions, if there are any, and location and the site.
All right. Well, obviously, a lot more to do on that story as we move forward. It's going to be another interesting session with the Chargers as we go. Well, when Gary Lawyer saw a sinkhole in his backyard in November, he did the right thing. He reported it to the city. Time was of the essence with an El Niño-fueled rainy season looming. But nothing was done, and when the rains hit last week, disaster struck. Here's Lawyer surveying the damage.
We don't even know where we're sleeping, We have dogs, and you can't just go to the hotel. It's like I don't even want to be like this because we just got to go. We're putting in 12-hour days, just trying to keep the flooding from going in the house. We're just ready for it to be over.
Well, as you can see, that's very devastating. Guy Lawyer there is pretty upset about this. So start by telling what happened specifically to these houses when those storms hit.
Well, to begin with, they had this big sinkhole developing that they knew was trouble, and they had set off every alarm bell and red flag they could think of to the city. On
a hillside up the hill.
Yeah, in a series of emails over time and visits from the city. And then, it was just like a river of water coming through their neighborhood and flooding out all their houses to the point where, they need to basically relocate for probably weeks, if not months, while they figure this out and sort it out with insurance companies and whatnot. And the city may end up with some liability for that, although you didn't have Mike Aguirre rushing to the scene and claiming city responsibility for this. But, you know.
You're referencing the Soledad mudslide years ago.
Yes. But, you know, certainly they're responsible for that flood channel, which didn't work. Or, excuse me, storm drain, which didn't work. Right. So
they warned them in Thanksgiving back in November, kept warning them. They did come out and kind of look around here. Yeah. But, you know, here we sit in January and this happened. Yeah,
you have these things where, you know, they send an email saying, could we get an update, please? And the city says, sorry, there's no update available. You know, there's need all over the city. Right. You know, the mayor talked about infrastructure this week in his State of the City, obviously. But you wonder if that $100 million that the NFL is going to send to San Diego, if it could be used to maybe fix up the storm drains. There's $200 million in need, and they've only identified about $50 million of expense to go toward that need. Mm-hmm. So fixing things up so that more of this doesn't happen does not seem to be immediately on the horizon. We had another story in this morning's paper about some neighbors on another street in San Carlos, Wheaton Drive, where they've got basically a flood coming down, not a flood, but a flow of water coming down the hill right behind them every time it rains. And there's like, can you fix this? And the city's like, well, it's number 2 on our priority list. I'm not sure how you get on that list, and we intend to spend a lot more time with that to see how they're prioritizing, because at least the way things went down on Cabaret Street, it doesn't look like they're doing the best job they could of meeting the demands as they get critical.
Well, we should place folks in their minds where this is. This is kind of east of Lake Murray, not far from Patrick Henry High School, between kind of Mission Gorge, Jackson Drive, right. That area, and both these streets are out in that area. And as you say, this is happening broadly, and if these rains keep coming as advertised, we're in a lull right now, we could see this repeated in a lot of neighborhoods.
Yeah, and
Ricky, my understanding is that a typical homeowner's policy exempts flood. Yeah. If it falls from the sky and creates damage, the insurance company will fix it for you. Unless you've gone out and bought flood insurance, I believe these homeowners have no coverage.
They're out of luck, and I think their best hope will be to sue the city and win some money, which is likely to happen. Yeah. We've looked back at a case where a family won $135,000.
But that's down the road. You've got to pay for these repairs now.
Yeah, I mean that is possibly years down the road. Right. There may be some sort of settlement offered or something like that, but and it's easy for us to look in retrospect. Oh, you should have listened to these people and fixed that storm drain. Right. What's harder to figure out is which one should they fix next before next Tuesday's storm comes through, or maybe it's Wednesday.
Right.
The city has complained about the environmental review process in clearing these storm drains. They say it's very rigorous. They need approval from several different government agencies, and that's something that they've certainly complained about. The mayor actually asked the governor to declare a state of emergency ahead of the El Niño flooding season, or expected floods from El Niño. That currently hasn't been granted.
Right.
And there'll be a lot of other cities.
But this particular case was not that kind of storm channel. It was a storm drain that just was falling apart, I think. Wasn't that
That's correct. Yeah, cracks in a corrugated...
Now, there may have still been environmental things, but they haven't cited that in this case as for the delay.
No, I mean, this was just kind of a manpower thing, and they'd visited the site several times, and you get this picture. They had a clipboard and just kind of were thinking, what should we do here? When, the residents are saying, well, what you should have done was fix the pipe.
Now, when they say it's an emergency, can they waive some of the red tape and get in there quickly? Have they fixed it since then in this lull we've had after that?
Well, I know there was a flood the Monday before last, and then nothing was done before Wednesday when the rains came again, and they kind of got re-flooded. Honestly, I don't know what's happened since then. I don't think they've gone and rebuilt the whole storm drain, which is what one of their engineers said needs to be done.
And this isn't, before we leave this segment, this isn't the first time here. Your story referenced in 1995, a woman drowned following city inaction after a storm.
A 37-year-old woman drowned in 95. Her husband had been alerting the city the same way for several weeks, and then the UT investigated and found that the city had been warned 2 years prior on that one before that poor woman died. Again, we can always tell in retrospect which one's going to blow because it's after the fact. So, but it is clear the city needs an improved process and maybe some more investment in figuring that out beforehand.
Right. All right. Well, we will move on, but I'm sure you'll be doing a lot more stories, especially if the rains as predicted start arriving, as we saw last week.
We have one reporter who we've shifted directly from the drought coverage to the flood coverage.
Well, there you go. The El Niño change right there. Well, we're going to move on. If Democrats are all about taxing and spending, it appears Governor Jerry Brown didn't get that memo. Once again, the veteran Democrat put forth a conservative budget for the coming fiscal year. Here he is announcing his priorities.
Put more money in the rainy day fund, and I'm saying put in $2 billion more, number one, and then don't spend the money on ongoing programs. Do some one-time infrastructure because we have to fix buildings at the state level. We have parks, we have schools, we have a lot of things we got to do.
All right. So, I mean, Michael, it would seem we're rather flush given relative to recent years here. What's the governor so worried about?
Well, it's very interesting, Mike, because the governor, at a time when you could almost say, let the good times roll, he was almost doom and gloom when he unveiled his budget, and for good reason. He's been around for a long time, as we know, and seen the history of the state, and he's big on charts with his budgets, and he put up one that shows the years of deficit versus the years of surplus, and the years of deficit far outdistance the surplus not only in number but in size. So he says it's not if, it's when, and we have to be prepared for it. So as he said there, he's putting more money into this so-called rainy day fund, which is now up to $8 billion. It's grown a lot more because there is more money. Now, having said that, there's a lot more money for schools. They were able to keep the higher education tuition and fees flat at UC and CSU and community colleges, a lot of other things. But what he doesn't want to do is what some of his fellow Democrats want to do is start using this money to help flesh out social service programs. And they're legitimate programs and good ones for a lot of people, believe, because there's a lot of need out there and a lot of poor people and a lot of medical needs out there. But the governor has seen some of his predecessors, particularly Gray Davis when he was governor. He spent a lot of a surplus that baked it into these ongoing programs, and that's how he ended up with like a $35 billion deficit when the bottom fell out.
So things go south, and all of a sudden you're locked into these ongoing things and this mandatory spending here. So Brown is twice burned. How does he resist his own party in the Capitol? Because they control things up there. They could launch into new spending.
I think, quite frankly, the governor controls things. He's in charge, and not just because he's governor. He's got the power. The Democrats don't have a two-thirds vote. Overriding him would probably not happen.
You mean
anyway.
Republicans don't have a...
No,
they don't. I see what you're saying.
Because in a way, the Democratic governor, Governor Brown, who was viewed as a liberal so long ago, is the Republicans' best friend up there because they're still in the minority party. But the Democrats don't have the vote to force their will on the governor, so they have to negotiate. And certain, tax issues and spending issues, he's going to hold the line on, and I believe he has the will and power to do so.
And Republicans, they should be happy with Brown for another reason. He says in this statement here, he opposes extending the temporary Prop 30 tax hikes, and he is beefing up the rainy day fund. Remind us.
Well, I forget what year it was, but we passed Prop 30, and there's a lot of controversy about, that money was going to go to the classroom, and of course a lot of it went to teachers and other state employees. And you can argue, whether that worked out way, but it certainly helped pull the state out of the red along with the improving economy. But it was a temporary tax. It was graduated. Certain things ended at a certain point, but about 7 years. And the governor has been very consistent saying he's not going to support that. Now, some people want to, they need to put an initiative on the ballot. So we'll just have to see what kind of state the state is in the economy. It was rather remarkable that Californians passed that tax increase. I mean, that was a very difficult thing to do, and Brown championed it. So I think people are really going to be listening to him when this comes up again.
You let that go. So we've got a couple minutes here left on this topic. Tell us what happens now. There's a revise, and of course in years past we saw this long stalemate and went past the deadlines and all of that. So there'll be a revise in May, but you don't expect this to be stalemated and gone.
Not the way it has been. I mean, does it hit the deadlines? They've been doing that. It's always easier to do that when there's
your
more
party's
money.
in control
but,
too.
I mean, what's interesting is that the governor, is the one that puts out the revenue estimates, and frankly, a lot of people think he lowballs those, and so we see like just recently they have 3-point-something billion, almost $4 billion more than they anticipated. That also helps him negotiate by keeping the lid down on the amount of revenue there to divvy up. So that works to his favor, because if there's more revenue there, he can maneuver that into the sort of the one-time funding and the rainy day fund.
And the Republican criticism, what are they saying on the other side?
Well, like I said, it was rather interesting that there wasn't a lot of criticism of Brown. There were certain concerns about this. There needs to be some tax adjustments on medical insurers because of the big hole in the Medi-Cal program. He needs to negotiate with the Republicans more than the Democrats on that. But, they like it. They also want to move into infrastructure issues. That was one of the big issues. He called a special session on roads and infrastructure and the medical costs, and they didn't get traction on either of those. But people are saying there's like a $59 billion or more need in the roads and infrastructure in the state, and they don't nearly have the kind of money to do that. That's something plaguing governments at every level, but they need to find some money, and I think we're talking about big bonds and tax increases if that happens.
All right, well, that's a beautiful segue into our final segment here today. Thank you. More parks, help for homeless veterans, big boost for education and infrastructure, as Michael was saying. Those were the key points of Mayor Kevin Faulconer's State of the City address this week. And Andrew, the mayor, also pat himself on the back a little bit here. What did he take credit for?
I think one of the mayor's greatest strengths is taking credit for things, touting his own accomplishments. The Climate Action Plan passed unanimously by the City Council last month. That's certainly a big accomplishment of his. San Diego is now the largest city in the country to commit itself legally binding commitment to 100% renewable energy and cutting greenhouse gas emissions.
Very ambitious plan. Yeah.
Yes, and also he touted his homelessness plan. The city now has 2 year-round homeless shelters that are that have supportive services, and he said that last year San Diego has transitioned twice as many homeless people into housing as the year before.
Well, you guys are throwing me great segues here today, because that gets us into a bite we've got from here. He's got this ambitious goal to get the down-and-out veterans off the streets. Let's hear what he says.
First, for our veterans who are already on the streets, I'm working with San Diego landlords to open their doors. And second, for veterans like Faith that suddenly find themselves homeless, we are ramping up our rapid rehousing program. When veterans find themselves on the verge of homelessness or without housing, we will help them find a place to live so the word homeless never enters their vocabulary.
All right, he mentioned Faith there in that bite. Who is he talking about in terms of that veteran, and what kind of muscle is he putting behind this initiative?
Right. So Faith is, according to Faulconer, is an Army nurse. She was an Army nurse. She served in the Army for 11 years, and she fled an abusive relationship, ended up homeless, and then with the help of the San Diego Housing Commission, she made it back into an apartment with her son. She eventually got a job as a nurse and a master's degree. So that's a big success story, one big success story. In terms of muscle, he announced this Housing Our Heroes initiative that includes a partnership with the Regional Chamber of Commerce on and working with apartment associations. Trying to find landlords who are willing to rent to veterans and accept housing vouchers. He also said he's working with the San Diego Housing Commission and the county to identify sources of funding for all this, and that he's going to ask the City Council for $4 million as he mentioned in that soundbite, rapid rehousing program, so that once people are find themselves homeless, they can get back into housing as soon as possible.
All right, well, let's circle back to infrastructure there. What did Faulconer push regarding the city's woeful infrastructure situation?
Well, he said that the city is going to be spending just under $500 million this year on, quote, rebuilding our neighborhoods. And he also endorsed a ballot initiative that's being proposed by Councilmember Mark Kersey, and that would earmark money into a specific fund that would be dedicated for infrastructure, and that would be funded by growth in sales tax revenue, savings from pensions, and also growth in the general fund. What that initiative does not include, conspicuously, is a tax increase. That was on the table before, but it's now off the table. I think that some of the criticism of that plan is that San Diego has an infrastructure deficit estimated at $1.7 billion. That's a lot of money that the city needs to spend, and with the mayor proposing possibly a tax increase to fund the expansion of the convention center. Where are the priorities here? Do we need to be spending money on that, or fixing our roads and pipes?
And one theme,
a couple $100 million on a new stadium.
Well, it's a new stadium. There's your problem.
So.
And one priority, though, he talked about parks. Big push on parks, right?
Yeah. So he gave this figure of 50 parks. That includes both new parks and also renovating existing parks. And he also said he wants to create a master plan for the city so that there's more coordination across different neighborhoods, creating new parks. And another thing he announced was the Play All Day initiative, which is a partnership with San Diego Unified School District, making parks on school property available to members in those communities.
Which can create its own challenges with security and maintenance and liability. A couple of seconds left here. Mayor's running unopposed right now, Michael. Is he no opposition to this? He gets to say and sway.
Well, it's still some time to go, and that's probably why he doesn't want a tax increase on the same ballot with him. Yeah, it is rather remarkable. We've talked about this a lot. Democratic city, popular Republican mayor, no opposition. That feels pretty good going into the new year.
Well, we'll see what happens as it goes along on this and all these stories. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Dan McSwain of the San Diego Union Tribune, Ricky Young of the Union Tribune Watchdog Team, Michael Smolens, UT Politics Editor, and Andrew Bowen of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.